Welcome to the Inspiring Illustrations channel. The story of Queen Esther. Who was Esther in the Bible? The story of Esther is one of the most well-known in the Bible, recorded in the Old Testament book that bears her name. Set in the heart of the Persian Empire during the reign of Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, between 486 and 465 before Christ, this narrative transports us to a crucial period in the history of the Jewish people in exile. Esther, originally named Hadassah, was a young Jewish orphan, the daughter of Abihail. Raised by her cousin Mordecai, she grew up in foreign lands, far from her ancestral homeland. Her Persian name, Esther, likely derives from stara, meaning star, though some scholars suggest a possible connection to the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. Her Hebrew name, Hadassah, evokes the image of the myrtle, a shrub of symbolic significance. In addition to her notable beauty, which set her apart among the fairest in the kingdom, the Bible highlights Esther's bravery and loyalty to her people. Her journey from a young exile to the Queen of Persia is a testament to unwavering courage and faith. The turning point in Esther's life occurred when she discovered a sinister plot devised by Haman, a high-ranking official of the king, aimed at exterminating all the Jews in the empire. With extraordinary courage, Esther risked her own life by revealing her Jewish identity to the king and pleading for the safety of her people. Her courageous actions not only saved the Jews from destruction, but also changed the course of history. This dramatic deliverance is celebrated annually during the Jewish festival of Purim, a festive occasion that commemorates Esther's bravery and the divine providence that protected the Jewish people against all odds. In this video, we will embark on a fascinating journey through the life of Queen Esther, exploring in detail everything the Bible reveals about this remarkable woman of faith. We will examine her journey from beginning to end, uncovering the challenges she faced and the valuable lessons we can draw from her life to apply in our present day. Before we proceed, I would like to extend a special invitation to new viewers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications so you don't miss any of our engaging Bible studies. The key verse of the book of Esther, found in Esther chapter 4, verse 14, summarizes the central theme of the narrative. In it, Mordecai challenges Esther to recognize her providential role, saying, "And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this?" This powerful declaration reminds us that God often positions people strategically to fulfill His divine purposes. Now, let's dive deeply into the story of Esther, starting with the first chapter. Esther, chapter 1.
Ken Vashti disobeyes King Xerxes.
During the reign of King Xerxes over Persia, the capital was Susa, and the kingdom was divided into 127 provinces, extending from India to Ethiopia. In the third year of his reign, King Xerxes gave a banquet for all his officials and servants. The commanders of the armies of Persia and Media, along with the governors and nobles of the provinces, were also present. For 6 months, Xerxes displayed the wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty to all. After 6 months, the king hosted a banquet in the palace gardens for all the residents of Susa, both rich and poor. The celebration lasted 7 days. The courtyard was beautifully decorated with white and blue cotton curtains, tied with fine red linen cords, fastened with silver rings to marble columns. The floor was made of blue tiles, white marble, mother of pearl, and other precious stones. In the courtyard, there were couches made of gold and silver. The guests drank from golden goblets, each one unique, and the king ensured that his wine was served without limits. Everyone was free to drink as much as they wanted. Queen Vashti also hosted a banquet in the royal palace for all the women of the guests. On the 7th day of the feast, the king, who had consumed a significant amount of wine and was in high spirits, summoned his 7 personal eunuchs. These eunuchs were named Mehuman, Biztha Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar and Carcass. The king instructed them to bring Queen Vashti before him, adorned with her royal crown. She was extremely beautiful, and the king wished to display her beauty to the nobles and other guests. However, the queen refused to comply with the king's order, which made him extremely angry. Before making any decisions, the king sought advice from those versed in matters of law and tradition. The king summoned his advisors, those he trusted the most, including Karshina, Shether, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marcina, and Memucan. These were the 7 most important officials of Persia and Media, who held the highest positions in the kingdom and served as the king's closest advisors. The king asked them, "I, King Xerxes, sent an order to Queen Vashti through my servants, but she refused to obey. According to the law, what should be done?" Then Memucan spoke before the king and his ministers, saying, "What the queen has done is not only an offense against the king and his advisors, but also against all the men of the provinces of the kingdom. For when the women of the entire kingdom hear about what the queen has done, they will begin to despise their husbands, saying that King Xerxes ordered Queen Vashti to come, but she refused." Memucan continued, saying that on that very day, the wives of the officials of Persia and Media would hear about what Queen Vashti did and tell their husbands. As a result, women everywhere would not respect their husbands, and this would cause the men to be indignant towards their wives. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him decree that Queen Vashti be forbidden from appearing in his presence, and let this be recorded in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be revoked. Then let the king choose a woman better than Vashti to take her place as queen. When the king's decree is proclaimed throughout his vast kingdom, all women, whether rich or poor, will respect their husbands. The king and his ministers approved Memucan's suggestion, and the king decided to implement it. He sent letters to all the provinces of the kingdom, each written in the language and script of each province and each people, ordering that every husband be the head of his household and always have the final word. Esther, Chapter 2. Esther is crowned queen. After some time, the king's anger had subsided, but he still reflected on what Vashti had done and the decree he had signed against her. Then, some of his closest servants suggested to the king, "O king, let the most beautiful virgins in the kingdom be sought out. Appoint officials in all the provinces and order them to bring the most beautiful young women to the harem in Susa, the capital. Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the royal harem, will take care of them and subject them to beauty treatments. And then, O king, let the young woman who pleases you the most be the new queen in place of Vashti." The king found the suggestion good and decided to follow the advice. In Susa lived a Jew named Mordecai, son of Jair, descendant of Shimei and Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin. When King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took King Jehoiakim of Judah from Jerusalem as a prisoner, Mordecai was among the exiles who were taken along with Jehoiakim. Mordecai took care of his cousin Hadassah, also known as Esther, a young woman of great beauty and charm. Since her parents had passed away, Mordecai adopted her and raised her as his own daughter. When the king issued the order, many young women were taken to Susa, the capital, and placed under the care of Haggai, the person in charge of the palace harem. Esther was one of these young women. Haggai was pleased with her, and she quickly won his favor. Immediately, he arranged for her to receive beauty treatments and special food. Haggai also assigned 7 of the best maids from the palace to take care of her and moved Esther and her maids into the best quarters of the harem. Esther followed Mordecai's instructions and did not reveal her origin or family background to anyone. Mordecai walked daily in front of the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what would happen to her. The beauty treatment for the young women lasted 12 months. During the first 6 months, they used perfumes of myrrh, and in the following 6 months, other perfumes and beauty products. After this period, each young woman was taken to King Xerxes. When it was a young woman's turn to go from the harem to the palace, she could take with her anything she wanted. In the evening, she would go to the palace, and in the morning, she was taken to another harem under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail and cousin of Mordecai, the young woman Mordecai had raised and who won the favor of everyone who saw her, she took only what Haggai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, suggested. Esther was taken to the palace to present herself to King Xerxes in the month of Tevath, which is the 10th month of the 7th year of his reign. The king liked her more than any other young woman, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the others. He placed the crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet in Esther's honor and invited all the officials and servants. He declared a holiday throughout the kingdom and distributed gifts with royal generosity. During the time when the young women were being transferred to another harem, Mordecai was appointed by the king to a position in the government. Following Mordecai's advice, Esther had still not revealed her Jewish identity to anyone. She continued to obey Mordecai as she had done when he was bringing her up. Mordecai protects the king's life. In those days, while Mordecai was serving in the palace, he discovered that Bigthan and Teresh, two eunuchs who were guards in the palace, were angry with the king and planning to kill him. Mordecai informed Queen Esther, who told the king what Mordecai had discovered. After an investigation, it was confirmed that the information was true, and the two eunuchs were hanged. The king ordered that a report of the incident be recorded in the book that chronicled the history of the kingdom. Esther, Chapter 3. Haman plans to exterminate the Jews. After these events, King Xerxes appointed Haman, son of Hammedatha and descendant of Agag, as prime minister. The king ordered all the palace officials to bow down and kneel before Haman as a sign of respect. Everyone obeyed, except Mordecai, who neither bowed nor kneeled. The other officials asked Mordecai why he did not follow the king's command. Daily, they insisted that he obey, but Mordecai explained that he did not do so because he was a Jew. Then, the officials reported this to Haman to see if Mordecai would continue to disobey the king's order. Haman was furious when he realized that Mordecai did not kneel in his honor. When they informed Haman that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided that it was not enough to kill only Mordecai. He planned to exterminate all the Jews in the kingdom of Xerxes. In the 12th year of King Xerxes' reign, in the first month, the month of Nisan, Haman ordered that lots called Purim be cast to determine the day and month when the Jews would be killed. The chosen date was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Haman then said to the king, "In all the provinces of the kingdom, there is a people who follow laws different from those of other peoples. The worst, O king, is that they do not obey your orders, and therefore it is not in your best interest to tolerate their behavior. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them. And I promise to deposit 342,000 kilograms of silver into the royal treasury to pay for the government's expenses." The king took off his signet ring, used to seal his orders, and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha and descendant of Agag, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to Haman, "Keep your money, and these people I give into your hands. Do with them as you please." On the 13th day of the first month, Haman summoned the palace secretaries and dictated the order. He instructed that the order be translated into all the languages spoken in the kingdom, and that each translation follow the script used in each province. The order was to be sent to all the king's representatives, the governors of the provinces, and the leaders of the various peoples. It was written in the name of the king and sealed with his signet ring. The order was sent by couriers to all the provinces of the kingdom. The order was to exterminate all the Jews in a single day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. All Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be killed without mercy. Additionally, all the Jews' possessions were to be confiscated for the government. In each province, the order was to be read publicly so that when the appointed day arrived, everyone would be prepared. The king gave the order, and the couriers quickly took the message to all the provinces. In Susa, the capital, the order was publicly proclaimed. Meanwhile, the king and Haman sat down to drink, while the city was thrown into confusion. Esther, Chapter 4. Mordecai asks for Esther's help. When Mordecai learned of all that had happened, he tore his clothes in mourning, dressed in sackcloth, and covered himself with ashes. He walked through the city crying out loudly and bitterly. When he reached the palace gate, he could not enter because no one dressed in sackcloth was allowed to enter. In every province where the king's order was read, the Jews began to mourn loudly. They wept, fasted, and many dressed in sackcloth and lay in ashes as a sign of great sorrow. Esther was deeply troubled when her maids and eunuchs informed her of what had happened. She sent clothes for Mordecai to wear, but he refused. Then Esther called Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to find out what was happening and the reason for all his distress. Hathach went to Mordecai in the square in front of the palace, and Mordecai explained everything that had happened. Mordecai also mentioned the exact amount of money Haman had promised to deposit into the king's treasury as payment for the destruction of all the Jews. Mordecai gave Hathach a copy of the decree that had been proclaimed in Susa, ordering the death of the Jews. He asked Hathach to show it to Esther, explain the situation, and urge her to plead with the king for mercy for her people. Hathach did as Mordecai had requested, and Esther sent the following reply to Mordecai. Everyone knows, from the palace servants to the inhabitants of all the provinces, that no one man or woman can enter the inner court of the palace to speak to the king without being summoned. The law is clear: anyone who enters without permission will be put to death unless the king extends his golden scepter to them. And it has been a month since the king last called for me. When Mordecai received Esther's message, he sent back this reply: Do not think that because you live in the palace, you alone among all the Jews will escape death. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa. Fast and pray for me for 3 days, without eating or drinking, day or night. I and my maids will also fast. After that, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went and did everything Esther had instructed him. Esther, chapter 5. Esther invites the king and Haman to a banquet. On the 3rd day of the fast, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace, in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall, facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter, and the king asked, What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. Esther replied, If it pleases the king, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared for him. The king then ordered Haman to be brought quickly so that they could accept Esther's invitation. So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther, What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given to you. Esther replied, If I can count on the king's kindness and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I would like to invite you and Haman to another banquet that I will prepare tomorrow. Then, I will reveal what I desire. Haman's plans against Mordecai. Haman left the banquet very happy. However, as he passed by the palace gate, he saw Mordecai, who neither bowed nor showed respect to him, which made him furious. Nevertheless, Haman controlled himself and went home. There, he called his friends and his wife, Zeresh. Haman began to boast about his wealth, the number of children he had, the promotions he had received from the king, and how he now held the highest position in the kingdom, above all the other ministers and officials. He added, Besides all this, I was the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she prepared. And she has also invited me to another banquet tomorrow. But none of this satisfies me as long as I see Mordecai, that Jew, sitting at the palace gate. Then his wife and all his friends suggested, Have a gallows built, about 20 meters high, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then you can go happily to the banquet with the king. Haman thought this was an excellent idea and had the gallows built. Esther, chapter 6. Mordecai's victory. That night, the king could not sleep and ordered the book of the Chronicles of the kingdom to be brought and read to him. The part read recounted how Mordecai had discovered the plot of Bigthana and Teresh, 2 eunuchs who guarded the palace, to assassinate the king. The king then asked, What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The officials replied that nothing had been done for him. At that moment, Haman entered the outer court of the king's palace to ask for Mordecai to be hanged on the gallows he had prepared. The king asked, Who is in the court? It is Haman. The attendants answered, Bring him in, ordered the king. Haman entered, and the king said to him, I want to honor a certain man. Tell me what should be done for him. Haman thought, "Who could the king want to honor more than me?" So he answered the king, "Have the royal robes brought that the king wears and the horse that the king rides, and place a royal crown on the horse's head. Then hand the robes and the horse over to one of the king's most noble officials. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" The king commanded Haman, "Go at once, get the robes and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended." So Haman got the robes and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home, with his head covered in grief. He told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisers and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him, you will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. Esther, chapter 7. The death of Haman. The king and Haman went again to the banquet prepared by Queen Esther. While they were drinking wine, the king asked Esther, "What is your request? Ask for anything you want, and it will be given to you, even up to half of my kingdom." Esther replied, "If I can count on the king's kindness, and if it pleases the king, I ask that you save my life and the life of my people. My people and I have been sold to be destroyed and killed. If it were only a matter of being sold as slaves, I would have kept quiet, because that would not justify disturbing the king for such a minor matter." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is the man who has dared to do such a thing, and where is he?" Esther replied, "Our enemy and adversary is this vile Haman." Haman, terrified, looked at the king and queen. The king, enraged, left the banquet hall and went into the garden. Haman, realizing that the king had decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. He threw himself on the couch where Esther was reclining, pleading for mercy, just as the king returned from the garden. Seeing Haman, the king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face. One of the eunuchs, named Harbona, said, "A gallows, 75 feet high, stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. And the king's fury subsided. Esther, chapter 8. The decree to protect the Jews. On the same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the house and possessions of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Mordecai was presented to the king, for Esther had revealed that he was her relative. Then the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Esther appointed Mordecai as the administrator of all Haman's property. Later, Esther threw herself at the king's feet, weeping, and begged him to revoke the order of Haman, the descendant of Agag, so that the terrible plan against the Jews would not be carried out. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther. She rose and stood before him. Then she said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor with him, and if he thinks it is right, let him issue a decree to revoke the order of Haman, the son of Hammedatha and descendant of Agag, who decreed the death of all the Jews in the kingdom. For I cannot bear to see the destruction of my people and the death of my relatives." King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, "I have hanged Haman because of the plot he devised to kill the Jews, and I have given his property to Esther. However, a decree issued in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked. Therefore, write another decree as you see fit in the king's name and seal it with the king's ring." This happened on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. Mordecai summoned the king's secretaries and dictated a decree to the Jews, to the king's satraps, to the governors of the provinces, and to the nobles of the various peoples in all the provinces of the kingdom, which numbered 127, from India to Ethiopia. The decree was written in the script of each province and in the language of each people, and also in the script and language of the Jews. The letters were written in the name of King Xerxes, sealed with the king's ring, and sent by couriers on horseback, riding fast horses bred from the royal stud. In the letters, the king granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The appointed day for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers, riding the royal horses, raced out, spurred on by the king's command. And the decree was also issued in the citadel of Susa. Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Esther, chapter 9. The Jews' victory over their enemies. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the time came to carry out the king's order. The enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but the opposite happened. The Jews defeated their enemies. In every city where the king's order was read, the Jews gathered to attack those who wanted to kill them. No one could stand against them, for everyone was afraid of them. All the provincial officials, including the chiefs of various peoples, the king's representatives, and the governors of the provinces, helped the Jews because they feared Mordecai. Mordecai's fame had spread throughout the kingdom, and everyone knew he had great authority in the government. And Mordecai's power continued to grow more and more. The Jews acted as they pleased against their enemies, eliminating all with their swords and leaving no one alive. In Susa, the capital, they killed 500 men. They also executed the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews.
Taya names wäre Pashandata, Dalpon, Aspata, Porata, Adalia, Aridata, Pamashta, Arizai, Aridai, and Vaizata.
However, the Jews did not take their possessions. On the same day, the king was informed about the number of people killed in Susa. He then said to Esther, "Here in Susa, the Jews have killed 500 men, including the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now, what is your request? It will also be granted." Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the Jews in Susa carry out tomorrow the same decree they have done today. And let the bodies of Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." The king agreed and ordered that this be done. The decree was announced in Susa, and the bodies of Haman's 10 sons were hanged. On the 14th day of the month of Adar, the Jews in Susa gathered and killed 300 more men, but they did not take their possessions. On the 13th and 14th days of the month of Adar, the Jews in the provinces gathered to defend themselves. They killed 75,000 of their enemies, getting rid of all who hated them, but they did not take their possessions. On the 14th day, they rested and celebrated with feasting and joy. In Susa, the Jews celebrated on the 15th day of the month because they had defeated their enemies on the 13th and 14th days and rested on the 15th. Therefore, the Jews living in villages and towns celebrate the 14th day of Adar with feasting and joy, sending food to one another. The celebration of Purim. Mordecai recorded all the events and sent letters to all the Jews living in all the provinces of the kingdom, both near and far. In the letters, he instructed them to celebrate annually on the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as these were the days the Jews were delivered from their enemies. It was in this month that their sorrow and mourning were turned into joy and celebration. Therefore they were to observe these days with feasting and joy, sending food to one another and giving gifts to the poor. Thus the Jews, following Mordecai's instructions, began the tradition of celebrating these days. Haman, son of Hammedatha and descendant of Agag, the enemy of the Jews, had planned to exterminate them and cast lots called Purim to determine the day this would happen. However, Esther interceded with the king, who ordered in writing that the evil planned by Haman should fall on his own head. Thus, Haman and his sons were hanged. Therefore, these days are called Purim, which is the plural of Pur. As a result of Mordecai's letter and everything the Jews witnessed and experienced, they decided that they themselves, their descendants, and those who converted to Judaism would follow the tradition of celebrating these 2 days annually, as Mordecai had instructed. It was decided that from then on, all Jewish families in all the cities of the provinces of the kingdom would celebrate the feast of Purim, so that the Jews would always remember what had happened. Never, at any time, would they stop celebrating this feast. Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, also wrote a letter along with Mordecai, fully supporting the letter he had already written about the feast of Purim. Copies of the letter were sent to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom, wishing them peace and prosperity and confirming that the feast of Purim should be celebrated on the appointed days. Just as they had established for themselves and their descendants days of feasting and fasting, they were to follow these instructions for Mordecai and Queen Esther. Esther's decree, confirming the instructions for the celebration of Purim, was recorded in a book. Esther, Chapter 10. The Nobility of Mordecai. King Xerxes imposed forced labor on the inhabitants of his kingdom, both those in the coastal regions and those in the interior. All the great and wonderful achievements of Xerxes, as well as the full account of how he elevated Mordecai to a high position in his government, are recorded in the books of the history of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Let's analyze some important lessons we can learn from the life and story of Esther. First, courage in the face of adversity. Esther's life teaches us about the importance of courage in challenging situations. When her people faced the threat of annihilation, Esther risked her own life by approaching the king without being summoned. This action demonstrates that true courage often requires us to put the well-being of others above our own safety. Next, the importance of identity and roots. Although she lived in the Persian court, Esther maintained her Jewish identity. This reminds us of the importance of staying true to our beliefs and values, even when we are in environments that may not support them. Preparation for divine purpose is also highlighted. Esther's journey from orphan to queen illustrates how God can prepare us for important roles we cannot even imagine. Every experience in our life can be preparation for a greater purpose. The power of intercession is another important lesson. Esther used her position to intercede for her people. This teaches us about the power of prayer and advocacy on behalf of those who have no voice. Divine timing is another valuable lesson. The famous phrase for such a time as this reminds us that God often places us in specific situations for a divine purpose. We must be attentive to the opportunities God places before us. Wisdom and discernment are also evident. Esther demonstrated great wisdom in approaching the king and revealing Haman's plan. This teaches us the importance of acting with discernment and strategy, especially in delicate situations. God's providence behind the scenes is another important point. Although God's name is not explicitly mentioned in the book of Esther, his providential hand is evident throughout the narrative. This reminds us that God often works behind the scenes in our lives. The danger of pride and arrogance is another crucial factor. Haman's downfall serves as a warning against pride and arrogance. His fate teaches us that those who seek to destroy others often fall into their own traps. The importance of community and mutual support is visible. The fasting of the Jewish people in support of Esther highlights the importance of community and mutual support in times of crisis. Finally, the celebration of deliverance. The establishment of the Feast of Purim teaches us the importance of remembering and celebrating God's interventions in our lives and in the history of our people. These lessons from Esther's life remain relevant today, offering profound insights into faith, courage, and the role each of us can play in God's greater plan. So, which of these lessons touched you the most? Leave your comment and let's discuss how we can apply these truths in our lives.